In today's video, let's talk more about obesity and the current public health problem, focusing more on children. Now, why are we going to talk about children? Because this new report found that the prevalence of overweight and obesity, as a result of our own interventions to keep kids safe and to keep people safe, led to a dramatic increase in the prevalence of overweight and obesity. We're talking a 23.9% increase in prevalence, tracking, again, same time periods, pre-pandemic to post-pandemic. Now that is huge because we know that children, especially, and by the way, the children that got disproportionately impacted, the age group of those kids were between the ages of 5 and 11. And so we're going to talk about the importance of this and talk about our disproportionate responses. Where's the outrage now that tens of millions of children are now more obese or more overweight than they were before? Now, why should we have outrage for the dramatic increase in obesity and overweight? Well, we know there's complications, long haul complications linked with being overweight or obese. We're talking about depression. We're talking about social stigma. We're talking about being teased. We're talking about increasing the risk for diseases that are deadly, like heart disease, like cancer, like mild cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's, like chronic inflammatory disorders, like asthma, okay? The more overweight you are, the increased risk of asthma you have. We know that asthmatics suffer from more severe COVID-19, right? Autoimmunity. Obese people are more likely to suffer from autoimmune diseases. Now, we also know, of course, this has been long known, that obesity is linked with severe COVID-19 complications in adults and, wait for it, in children as well. So I ask you, my friends, as I share this data, in the Journal of the American Medical Association, the title of the paper is Changes in Body Mass Index Amongst Children and Adolescents During the COVID-19 Pandemic. Now, just a little background. Okay, we're going to get into this. We're going to talk about viral variants and how obese individuals might be driving future viral variants. We're going to talk about the immunopathology of obesity and all the different mechanistic links with obesity and severe outcomes, death, and the long haul complications, and all of that. But I just want to paint the picture so that we can have a nice foundation from which to build upon during today's short session with you, which, by the way, I'm grateful that you're here. Thanks for tuning in. If you're enjoying this content, please hit that like button and leave a comment below. If you're in iTunes, I would be so grateful if you could leave us a little bit of feedback. That goes a long way. And I do want to give a shout out to our sister company, Myoscience Nutrition. If you have family, if you have kids, and you want to support their micronutrient status, check out our new suite of gummies. These are phenomenal. We have a zinc gummy, has 12.5 milligrams of zinc, very bioavailable, tastes phenomenal, great for kids as lunches, as well as a vitamin D gummy with 1,000 IUs of vitamin D and a vitamin C gummy as well. So you can use the coupon code podcast over at Myoscience. Your kids or family will absolutely love these. But let's get back to obesity and the current public health problem, especially as it relates to children. And we're going to talk about a term here, recidivism. So what does that mean? That means that if you have a certain condition, you're more likely to carry that on throughout life. And so there's a lot of recidivism when it comes to overweight and obesity, especially amongst children. I think, parents, we see obese and overweight kids all the time, and we just think, oh, they'll run it off, right? They never do. In fact, overweight kids are much more likely to become obese adults. Obese children are much more likely to become morbidly obese adults. So friends, where's the outrage for the 23-point-something% increase in overweight and obesity amongst children? Okay, we know, and we're going to look at data here in just a moment from the American Academy of Pediatrics, okay? What they found over the course of 18 months or 20 months now, and I don't mean to diminish any loss of life, okay? So all lives matter. 425 children under the age of 19 have died, okay, from COVID-19 over the past 20 months. But yet we now have tens of millions of children who are now more overweight and obese than they've ever been. So are we robbing Peter to pay Paul? Okay, if we're going to get out, learn to live with this, it involves reviewing new science and changing our perspective. There's so much talk about keeping kids safe, but where's the talk about keeping kids lean? Where's the health campaign about keeping kids metabolically healthy? Where's the outrage for the fish sticks and the chocolate milk and the popsicles and whatever else that are being served to children in school? There's no outrage for that. There's no picketing. There's no congressman saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe our school system that is just, completely hyper-focused on spit guards, spit shields, ventilation, masks, and all of this. you know, for a small percentage of the children that are actually being disproportionately impacted by the virus, yet there's there's no public campaign. There's no outrage for the dramatic increase in obesity and all of that in children. So it's not just me saying this. There's a lot of scientists who are now saying, hey, look, our response to this growing crisis of obesity and overweight is really suboptimal. And we're not sort of giving this public health problem the same attention that we should be giving it in regards to other conditions and other infectious diseases. So we're going to talk about that. Just some background and perspective. Let's talk a little bit more about how obesity impacts adults negatively when it comes to this current public health problem and infections in general. Then we'll get into the nuances of the details from this new report from the Journal of the American Medical Association that just tracked was hundreds of thousands of kids. I think it was 160,000, something like that. And found, unfortunately, that children in the age group of 5 to 11 have been disproportionately impacted. So background and perspective. This was another article here in the JAMA Network. The title of this is Body Weight Changes During Pandemic-Related Shelter in Place in a Longitudinal Cohort Study. So this was a study of 269 individual participants in 37 different states. And what they looked at using Bluetooth weight measurements, over 7,000 weight measurements over the course of the pandemic. They found that there's a linear mathematical correlation here between the duration of the shelter in place and the amount of weight people gained. And it turns out for like every 3 weeks, it was like 1.5 pounds along those lines. And so in analyzing these weight trends amongst initial shelter in place, we found a significant increase in weight over the post shelter in place period at a rate of roughly 1.5 pounds of weight gain per month. So it's a little off there. Although this may not appear clinically important, prolonged effects have occurred with the pandemic might lead to substantial weight gain. So the inactivity and the weight gain, and of course, we've talked a lot about obesity and overweight as it relates to challenges and increased vulnerability for not only poor outcomes when it comes to vaccinations, but also poor outcomes when it comes to getting the virus in general. We know that I think it was 78% of people who were hospitalized were overweight or obese. And as this image eloquently sort of characterizes the negative sequelae associated with being overweight or obese when it comes to this particular pathogen, and that's also not unique to SARS-CoV-2. This is influenza. This was found in MERS and the first SARS outbreak, H1N1. So obese people are immunocompromised. They're more likely to have a blood that can coagulate and create clots, and so therefore can have strokes or embolisms and challenges there. They're more likely to have an altered microbiome, and we're going to talk in the next slide here, in the next image, about how the obesogenic environment favors a viral sort of microbiota or a virome that enhances further exacerbates the prevalence of viral variants. We're going to talk about that. So impaired immune responses, hypertension, and all of these things. So it's been very clear. And by the way, friends, this paper is phenomenal. The title of this is Factors Associated with Increased Morbidity and Mortality of Obese and Overweight COVID-19 Patients. This was published in the Journal of Biology. A great image. Again, for those of you that work with people, you have overweight friends and family, you can share this with them and say, hey, look, I know like CNN and MSNBC doesn't talk to you about this, but this is important. If you want to reduce viral load, there's data actually showing that overweight people have a higher viral load compared to metabolically healthy lean people. So that's important. Now, this is the paper that I was talking to you about, and this was published in 2020 before the outbreak. This was actually March of 2020. So obesity-related microenvironment promotes the emergence of virulent influenza virus strains. So we've heard a lot about variants of SARS-CoV-2 from the Delta to now Lambda and all these things. Well, it turns out that the obese host might provide a unique microenvironment for disease pathogenesis, characterized by a state of low-grade chronic inflammation resulting in suppressed innate and adaptive immune responses. We've talked about this before. Just a few days ago, we talked about the study from Italy that found that waist circumference was linked with suboptimal adaptive immune responses to immunizations. And so they go on to say the altered microenvironment associated with obesity supports a more diverse viral cross-species and affords the emergence of potentially pathogenic variants capable of inducing greater disease severity in lean hosts. Now, again, we've heard about variants. We've heard a lot about variants and how, various pundits have speculated as to why the variants are emerging. Well, it's because the unvaccinated. It's because of these people. It's because of that. Well, could it be that because about 73% of adults are overweight or obese and they have a chronically inflamed innate immune system that is having a suboptimal initial response when people are getting initially exposed to SARS-CoV-2. And so the virus, they have a much higher viral load, and higher viral load means more replication, more dividing, more increased probability of creating a variant that is escaping the immune system that is driving this. Well, again, if you say that, you sound like you're fat shaming. I'm not fat shaming. We've published many videos about how to lose weight, how to balance circadian rhythms, like all of these things. I'm not fat shaming at all, but I'm saying, why aren't we also including messaging about weight loss and improving body composition and the importance of that? So these articles go on to say this is likely due to the impaired interferon response, which is seen in both obese mice and obese-derived human bronchial epithelial cells, suggesting that obesity, aside from its impact on influenza virus pathogenesis, permits a stochastic accumulation of potentially pathogenic viral variants, raising concerns about its public health impact as the prevalence of obesity continues to rise. Not only in adults, my friends, unfortunately, we have dramatically increased the prevalence of obesity in children. Some of those children, and I bet there's a lot of children that are now more overweight or obese than ever before. The data shows 23% increase overall. Some of those children will, for now and forever in their lives, be obese. They will not live a life free of obesity because the recidivism, this is scary. Where's the outrage? Where's the concern? So let's talk more about the study and talk about why we have a paradoxical response to one public health challenge, and whereas we totally ignore another, which is seemingly larger and impacts the other public health challenge. Okay, so getting back to the paper that we started off with, changes in body mass index amongst children and adults during the COVID-19 pandemic. So this cohort of 191,000 children was racially and ethnically diverse. There was 49% girls, there was Asians and Native Americans and Blacks and Hispanics and all this. So the mean pre-pandemic BMI was 20. Okay. The study population was compared with the overall Kaiser Permanente pediatric population. So again, they were corroborating evidence here from, BMI and all that from this data, but also corroborating that with Kaiser Permanente's data. And what they found is that, pre-pandemic, the prevalence of overweight and obese was about 38.9%. Kaiser's data was 39.4%. So it's right in that ballpark. And what they found is that youth gained more weight during COVID-19 pandemic than before the pandemic. And here's the table. And let's read it and dive into this. The greatest change in the distance from the median BMI for age occurred among the 5 through 11-year-olds, with an increase in BMI of 1.57, which is pretty significant, compared to 0.91 amongst 12 through 15-year-olds and 0.48 amongst 16 through 17-year-olds. So, teens and so forth, they're probably driving and doing all that, more able to sort of get away. But of course, with school closed and parents very concerned, children aren't as, 5-year-olds, 11-year-olds aren't mobile like teens are. So adjusted for height, this translates to a median gain for the 5 through 11-year-olds of 2.3 kilograms. So again, that's over 5 pounds. So if you weigh, 50 pounds, 5 pounds is like 10% of your body weight. So you gain 10% of your body weight in fat. I mean, that's insane. So during the pandemic, okay, let me go back. Adjusting for height, this translates into a median gain amongst 5 through 11-year-olds of 2.3 kilograms more during the pandemic than during the reference period. So they gained a lot more weight during, say, similar age or similar dates before and after. Okay. Now, that's important to understand. So the overweight and obesity increase amongst the 5 through 11-year-olds increased from 36.2% to 45.7%. That is insane. Let me read that again. Overweight or obesity increase amongst 5-year-olds through 11-year-olds from 36% to 45.7% during the pandemic, for an absolute increase of 8.7% and a relative increase of 23.8% compared with the reference period. Now, this is what's scary about this, my friends, is, again, we talked about it. the recidivism. These overweight kids may never lose that weight, that 5 pounds that they gained in probably pure body fat, which is a huge relative percentage of their weight. They're probably not going to lose that. And what's the negative sequela associated with that? The stigma, the shortness of breath, the increase in inflammation, the hypertension, how it affects the mind, the whole thing, mood. This is crazy. So the absolute increase in overweight and obesity was 5.2% amongst children between the ages of 12 and 15, and 3.1% amongst children between 16 and 17 years old. So we know that our adolescents, and there's all this talk about, kids are resilient, okay? Well, find me a kid who was abused. Find me a kid who was raped. Find me a kid whose parents yelled at them or was in an abusive household. They hold on to that and they remember that forever, right? So there was this video that's kind of unrelated to this conversation, but it has parallels to what we're talking about here. This guy in his 50s, he remembered being bullied by someone who was on a school board. And there's a video. If you do man confronts bully 35 years later. So for all this talk about kids being resilient, there's this notion or subset of psychology of adverse childhood events. And these events are linked with all these negative health ramifications later in life. So yes, kids can be resilient to a certain point, but they remember so much more and hold on to this. And it seems that physiologically, those metabolic memories are lasting as well. And that's why, these overweight kids become obese adults. Obese kids become morbidly obese adults. And so unfortunately, this dramatic prevalence in the relative increase of 23.8% in obesity and overweight in children, is not going to go away. And so why aren't we outraged? Where's the outrage for the tens of millions of kids? There's between 73 and 75 million children under the age of 19 in this country, and we've dramatically made them metabolically unhealthy, unfortunately. And so the researchers conclude significant weight gain occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic amongst youth, especially among the youngest children. This is saddening. When I read this, I almost wanted to cry for the first time because it's so tough. And to get through to these parents who are so focused on keeping kids safe. And I have data in just a moment we're going to talk about, that. So these findings, if generalizable to the U.S., suggest an increase in pediatric obesity due to the pandemic. So it's due to our response to the pandemic. But again, when you talk about childhood obesity, when you talk about keeping kids physically active, as a family, we go hiking every weekend, we walk after meals, we practice archery, we're in sports, we're biking, we're doing everything. I wish all families would do that. So here's data. Again, there's so much focus on keeping kids safe. Here's data of the cumulative childhood deaths throughout the entire pandemic. There's been 425, okay? You might think, wow, 425. Well, how many kids are there? Again, 73 to 75 million. So you do the math. This is a very small percentage of kids have actually died. Where's the outrage? Where's and by the way, overweight and obesity is linked with poor outcomes from COVID-19 in children as well. It's not just relegated to adults. So this is important now. I really like this paper here. This scientist, his name is Ravi Jayahari, and the paper is "Our response to the obesity crisis reflects our bias as a society." He goes on to say, "In my practice, virtually all the children with severe COVID-19 symptoms and hospital admissions were adolescents with severe obesity." You don't really hear about that, but if you type in, Delta variant children, the media has done a lot of feature stories here. Most of those kids are overweight or obese, and I'm not just being, stigmatizing here. This is just like saying the sky's blue. This is what's happening. So similar to the blunted response to influenza vaccine, the findings from an earlier study suggest that patients with central adiposity who received a COVID-19 mRNA vaccine had a neutralizing antibody level lower than in patients without central obesity. Now, again, why is this important? Because there's a lot of people focused now on vaccinating children, to protect them. But if we've made children worse, what are we doing? Are we really protecting them if we know that, immunizations may not be totally as protective in overweight children compared to not? And so these are important questions that we should all focus on And again, there's a bias in our society. And we're not focusing on these. So Dr. Ravi goes on to say, in my practice, virtually all of the children with severe COVID-19 symptoms and hospital admissions were adolescents with severe obesity. And he goes on to talk about how the efficacy of the vaccines are sort of contingent upon low body fat percentage and some of the studies that have been raised. But this was a great article published in the journal Biology that I would highly recommend checking out because it's important. And to finish off, I think this article was important because it talks about the pathologic changes within our body as a result of weight gain and how those impact susceptibility to COVID-19. So this was Zimmerman et al. The title of this is Why is COVID-19 Less Severe in Children? A review of the proposed mechanisms underlying age-related differences in the severity of COVID-19 infections. And so they go on to say children have a lower prevalence of the comorbidities that have been associated with severe COVID-19 in adults, such as obesity, diabetes, and hypertension. Well, let's pause here. We're going to look at a paper that found that diabetes has increased in the last several years there's been a 95% increase in type 2 diabetes in children. 95% increase. Then we just made children more overweight. There's been a 23.8% increase in overweight or obesity in children. So we are exacerbating the age-related comorbidities or underlying health conditions in children, the very conditions that make the adults more susceptible. Where's the outrage? I'm not really sure. So even though no definitive risk factors have been identified in children, those with chronic lung issues, cardiovascular disease, and obesity often require more hospitalization compared to previously healthy children. Here's a table they talk about some of the changes in adults versus children: endothelial dysfunction, clotting, pre-existing immunity, comorbidities, obesity, and all that. And again, the data is coming out showing that we have made our children sicker and more susceptible to severe complications with this. So I just want you to have this data at your fingertips so you can talk with parents, friends, families, your neighbors that are keeping their kids stuck in their house. Like I see this in my neighborhood all the time. I used to see, and this is anecdotal, of course, but way more kids playing outside compared to I do now. I barely ever see kids outside, ever. And it's saddening. So this was another paper, and the title of this is Prevalence of Type 1 and Type 2 Diabetes in Children and Adolescents in the United States between 2001 and 2017. And what they found was absolutely scary. So this was, I'm looking here right on the CDC's website. Increases in diabetes are always troubling, especially in youth. Rising rates of diabetes, particularly type 2 diabetes, which is totally preventable, by the way, has the potential to create a cascade of poor health outcomes. And this was said by Dr. Imperator, MD, PhD, Chief of the Surveillance Epidemiology, Economics, and Statistic Branch in the CDC's Division of Diabetes Translation. There's a lot of stuff there. Okay, compared to the children who develop diabetes in adulthood, youth are more likely to develop diabetes complications at an earlier age and are at a higher risk of premature death. Okay, let me share these trends with you. The number of children living with type 2 diabetes has grown by 95% between the years 2001 and 2017. Okay, you might think, well, why are we serving chocolate milk in school? Why do we have candy in kids' schools? Why is every day a treat day? Why is there fake orange juice in the school lunches? What about the fish sticks? What about the donuts? What about the cereal? Where's the outrage for this? And it seems that our thinking is so biased. We are so focused on immediate gratification. In conclusion, okay, we want to keep kids safe. We want to put a mask on. We want to keep them at home. All right, that's immediate gratification, protection from the virus. But we don't think about all of the unintended harms associated with that, the downside, the increased risk for developing these chronic conditions that increase risk for premature death and severe disease when it comes to non-communicable diseases, but also severe infectious diseases. So I just wanted to share these trends with your friends. I know you like to share these with your friends and family. We got to think differently if we want to become healthier and more resilient as a society. So I'm grateful that you're here. Thanks as always for tuning all the way in. If you want to help support your family's micronutrient balance, please hop on over to myoscience.com and check out all of the new gummies. And we also have a liquid vitamin D that's phenomenal for kids. You can just put a few drops in their smoothie and their drinks, and they wouldn't even know that they're replenishing their vitamin D levels and supporting vitamin D health. I'm grateful that you tuned all the way in. Thanks for hitting that like button. We will catch you all on a future episode down the road. Until then, be well. Catch you all soon. Bye now.